so much for being willing to observe my showcase. This is to show my supervisor and anyone who I applied to that I reached every standard, and they can see my evidence to see how well I succeeded in reaching that standard in my student teaching. So I will be covering the standards that I conquered. I will be giving you my concluded philosophies of education and learning, and then I will conclude with how I saw spiritual growth in the students. So first, how I conquered the standards. I will be going through the standards first, just one at a time, and every time I list a standard, I will then show the evidence. You have two separate packets for that. You have the main showcase that's in the brackets, and then on your left-hand folder, you have the evidence that supports that. So for those who have the blue folder, I suggest you take out the evidence packet just so that it'll be easy for you to flip through it and things like that. So the first standard is learner development. The teacher understands how learners grow and develop, recognizing that patterns of learning and development vary individually within and across the cognitive, linguistic, social, emotional, and physical areas, and designs and implements developmentally appropriate and challenging learning experiences. When I first came into the classroom, the first thing I noticed was that the students were highly active and they had a short attention span. Some of it because some of the students are legitimately ADHD. Some of the other ones just haven't really been trained well in how to control themselves. So for that, I included a lot of motion and music with my lessons. And I also made sure to include a very thorough differentiated lesson whenever I prepared one, because the academic levels varied completely. I had some fourth graders who were reading at a second grade level and some fifth graders who were reading at a 7th, 8th grade level. So it was really everywhere. Math, same thing. So as you can see in the showcase evidence, some of the things that I included in my lessons were highly tactile lessons. So for science, we created Oobleck, and we experimented on whether or not we thought it was a solid or a liquid. Because of the consistency, when you first touch it, it feels super heavy, but then if you were to put a paper clip in it, eventually it would sink. Along with the Oobleck, I had little cubes and had them build houses or a bed, whatever thing they wanted to construct on their own, and it was to pair with perimeter in area. We would create our little tower or something like that, and then they would have to figure out what the height is, what the width is, what the length is. And for the 5th graders, I had them actually do the calculations to find the volume. The 4th graders didn't actually need to reach that level yet, so I just wanted them to kind of have a good understanding of what the overall, the top area, the surface area, not volume yet. So some things that I wanted to challenge the students with was note-taking and essays. As you see in the bottom left, you see a note or notes over mixed numbers. This is Melanie's notebook. Every student, I had them take their own notes. It was something that I decided would be really helpful, especially for the 5th graders as they are going into middle school. They should learn how to take notes. So I made sure that they were structured, and basically the rule was whatever I put on the board, it was their responsibility to put it in their notes. And it was free for me to put it on the test. It was something that they are then responsible for. Another thing I challenged them with were essays. Now this is actually a morning work that Elizabeth wrote, and it was 3 pages long. She kind of took it and ran with it. There are some who just immediately love to go for that kind of writing. There were some who would only do the minimum sentence structure. However, I made sure, especially by week 2, week 3, when we got into the hang of it, that I was expecting at least 4 or 5 sentences, just so that they would get used to the idea of writing a paragraph. Now, standard 2, learning differences. The teacher uses understanding of individual differences in diverse cultures and communities to ensure inclusive learning environments that enable each learner to meet high standards. So with the ADHD and highly activity, I included fidget tools when I read aloud. If you see on the top left, the eraser was specifically Helena's. She loves to tap when she has to stand still. She'll be tapping on her thigh, but she loves to tap on the desk, something that kind of more bounced back. And so what I did is I gave her the eraser to tap on so that it muted the sound, yet helped her with the tapping tendency. With the pom-poms, those were for people like Germany, Josh, even Matthias, Elizabeth, who needed something just to touch, something to feel. Parker, when he was here, he loved to use his silly putty. So there were things like that. I originally had some straws, but just decided that those were a little too just distracting because there were some beads and stuff and it was just getting too much. So it just came down to pom-poms and eraser. Now, different approaches to student writing. With Kennedy, she is a very poor speller. She is my second grade reading level. So when she writes an essay, what I will do is instead of just crossing everything out on her essay, I will rewrite it completely. Now, I'm not changing much of the sentences, I'm really just rewriting the words, and I have her just copy down what I wrote. She is really great at copying. When she looks at a word on the board, even a word like mediator, she can write it completely fine in her notes. She can copy down very well. It's her own mind trying to figure out how to spell it, her own phonetic awareness, which is poor. So things like that, where I would just rewrite it, help her with not only seeing a good mentor text of what the spelling looks like, but also I think I helped with her confidence because she didn't see all this red or blue ink all over her essays. Someone like Matthias, though, who wrote on the bottom right, I felt more freedom to just cross out, to give simple notes, to help him and have him experience what a professional editing on a paper looks like. With the kinesthetic learners, I did things such as a roll and spell for their spelling activity. So they would roll a dice, and then they would have to find out how they needed to spell the word, and then they would spell it. It was really helpful because with each word, it was almost unique in how they had to spell it. So it really makes it more concrete in the mind. Also, with the different approaches to the students' writing and the kinesthetic activity, you can see Kennedy's notes on the bottom left. You see the words like mediating, thoughts, and even like God's word. We can read a devotional book. She wouldn't have been able to spell that out completely on her own. It was stuff like that where originally I thought about just providing her the notes so that she didn't have to write everything down, but she seemed to actually catch up just fine. And so I thought that the fact that she needed a mentor text was much more important. Standard number 3, learning environments. The teacher works with others to create environments that support individual and collaborative learning, and that encourage positive social interaction, active engagement in learning, and self-motivation. Originally, I had walked in with desks and rows and columns. For the class, they would try to get out of their chair to talk to someone else, and also I just naturally wanted more collaborative learning as in pairing students up and that sort of thing in my lessons. So what I did is I put them into table groups of 4. That didn't work out so well because enough students were close enough together, and with each group there was at least 2 people who didn't work well together. The class is just so small, you couldn't pair it up perfectly. So what I did later was put them into table pairs. Everyone has someone in the classroom who they benefit from. And so what I did was put them into pairs. I still split it up. 4th grade and 5th grade were on different sides of the classroom. Really helped with just different lessons, with reading and math, as well as just gave them more separation because just socially they don't interact as well as they do with their home grade. Another way to improve the environment was positive reinforcement. When I came into the classroom, it was not really focused on that. It was more of a lecture when there was bad behavior. So what I did was try to give them a reward, give them something to strive for. And with that, we actually saw improvement. The goal was to reach 100 marbles. They had an empty bucket, and I would put in 4 or 5 marbles for a good class period, or 2 or 3 marbles for good hallway walking, because we were even struggling with that. So once they reached to 100, they got 30 minutes to an hour of just free time on a Friday. Especially when we got closer to 100, they would really try to get at each other as far as no, be quiet, that sort of thing. And just the practice of that, hallway walking was just naturally better. We saw better, just more willingness to take on the assignments instead of dilly-dallying. They were willing to do it because they knew that they had a reward in the end. Now, along with collaborative learning, I morning work to be a bit more collaborative. So when I asked them to just write any story they wanted to, you can kind of see Alana and Melanie's essays a jillion years in the future and in a billion years from now. They made it collaborative as far as like, let's write about, when the earth ends or things like that. And that was something that I was completely okay with, especially with Alana, who usually only writes like 3 or 4 sentences. The fact that she wrote 2 pages was very encouraging to me, and I could really tell that she could do it. She could reach it. And so just by simply giving some freedom as far as what they wanted to write, I was able to really see where their academic level was in their writing. Standard number 4, content knowledge. The teacher understands the central concepts, tools of inquiry, and structures of the discipline. He or she teaches and creates learning experiences that make these aspects of the discipline accessible and meaningful for learners to assure mastery of content. Now with standard 4, I made sure to include some inquiry in the 5th graders' essays specifically by having them research a bit, find 3 or 4 details about the American Revolution or early American colonial times, and it was basically a historical fiction essay where they can make up their own story, but they had to make it somewhat realistic. So in the manila folder, you see Abby have her notes next to the book that she included, and this manila folder was actually their writing portfolio. They would include their notes, they had their rough draft in this manila folder, they had their final draft, and when it was all done, they would submit the folder to me. You also see connections in the history with the Mississippi River and Nile River. They are a bit far apart geographically, and the times where they may have had a huge impact also varied. However, the impacts were actually fairly similar. And so what I wanted the students to do was try to find those connections. I gave the 4th graders Mississippi River, the 5th graders Nile River. We just took those notes on the board, compared, contrast, and just that sort of connection, even when it's in the same subject, was really helpful in enabling the students to see those patterns even in a subject like history. In order to create more meaningful times in the day, I included prayer and worship. When I first came in, there was no prayer at all in the day. So every morning I started taking prayer requests, and I would pray with the students. Now it was a little hard for them to focus, however, eventually it did become a usual thing where sometimes I would do it in the morning, sometimes I would do it right before Bible, but if it came to a point where we got to lunch and we hadn't prayed yet, there would be students being like, Miss Coons, I have a prayer request, like, can we just pray right now? And I'm like, yeah, for sure, totally. So we would just drop everything, we would take requests and pray. Now with the 5th standard, application of content, the teacher understands how to connect concepts and use different perspectives to engage learners in critical thinking, creativity, and collaborative problem solving related to authentic, local, and global issues. With the area and perimeter lesson, before we got to even constructing our own building, I laid out a rectangle on the floor with duct tape, and I said, this is a bedroom. Let's find the perimeter and the area of the bedroom. Area for finding the wallpaper, perimeter for simply just finding the dimensions, because dimensions are really important when buying a house and things like that. So I didn't refresh them on how to find it. I had them use their freedom of collaborating with each other, of working with each other, using the board, whatever they needed to find the perimeter and area. You see a few students using their specific feet to count the squares that were within the rectangle. You see the student Josh next to the whiteboard, who is actually just doing the math. He just saw 13 times 12, 156. It was actually during this lesson that I found out that he can calculate very well. Now, with Bible, I tried to make it a bit more applicable by having the students journal. So I gave them a question such as, how are people saved, which is very applicable to our faith as far as knowing how salvation works and how people are saved, just to check where they lied in their knowledge of salvation. And so I would read what they had. I usually wouldn't take off a huge amount of points because I really wanted them to have more freedom or more confidence that I would happily take whatever they write and whatever they think is true. And then I would respond with maybe a few notes where I saw holes in what they said, just to make sure that if they read it, hoping that they read it, they start filling in those holes. And it's just a really great relationship builder between me and the students. They see that I'm personally interacting with them. Another way to make the Bible lessons more meaningful was actually taking the memory verse and asking them how it applied to their salvation. Because memorizing verses is a huge part of our biblical curriculum. However, it seems to be just like, as long as they memorize the word for word, that's fine. And we haven't really done a whole lot of actual application of the verse specifically. We would have application in the lessons, but I wanted to make sure that the verse was also meaningful to them, because I was starting to realize that by week 2, they had already forgotten the Bible verse from just last week. So with the 6th standard, I specifically try to reach assessment, which is the teacher understands and uses multiple methods of assessment to engage learners in their own growth, to monitor learner progress, and to guide the teachers and learners' decision making. So I use both informal assessments and formal assessments. The informal assessments would be things such as the roll and answer, which again allowed a kinesthetic activity, but it was simply just 12 problems of how to subtract or add fractions. With the formal assessments, I made sure to include a wide variety of assessments. So I had matching, I had multiple choice, I had short answer, I had the journal questions were more of a long answer, and I had them write essays. So really their assessment was kind of all over the board. The 7th standard, planning for instruction. The teacher plans instruction that supports every student in meeting rigorous learning goals by drawing upon knowledge of content areas, curriculum, cross-disciplinary skills, and pedagogy, as well as knowledge of learners in the community context. So if you see with the blue folders, if you flip to the back, you can see some actual curriculum sheets, specifically in math, that I used in assessing the students. Now, I didn't use the curriculum all the time because the math curriculum actually did not teach the students for mastery of the content. It was one subject one day, such as area and perimeter, and then the next day would be something like multiplying. But there wasn't really a fluid, a step-by-step scaffolding of a specific concept. So what I did is I took the worksheets that were relatable and actually had them work together, and I just basically had the worksheet scaffold myself so that I taught more to the mastery of content. However, I didn't just use the curriculum, I also used things such as the roll and answer and my own tests, just to have a more wholesome assessment, because I felt like some of them were lacking, especially the reading test. It would only be like 7 questions and you were done. And I wanted to make sure, since we're spending a full week on a story, that they were wholesomely assessed on the story. Now, the 7th assessment, planning for instruction. The teacher plans instruction that supports every student in meeting rigorous learning goals by drawing upon knowledge of content areas, curriculum, we just went through this. So, again, curriculum sheets, differentiated instruction. With each folder, you have actual lessons that I planned out. And with that, at the end of every lesson, I made sure to include differentiation. And with the snapshot that you see in the showcase evidence, you actually see how in a lesson, I had specific students in specific groups, because I believed one was all ready for assessment, another one was just needing some more practice, and the 2 others needed more individual instruction. So with that, just well differentiation, and along with that, cross-disciplinary skills. Specifically, you see that with math and Bible with the showcase evidence, where actually in the 2nd and 3rd grade classroom, I taught how to round numbers and the difference between rounding numbers and exact numbers. What I did is I sent them to Bible verses that had specific numbers, and I asked them to read the verse and kind of see if they thought whether the verse was actually rounded or exact. And so it was a really great way to take the concept and really apply it to something that is even kind of touchy, as far as like, the Bible being completely true. Like, okay, like, yes, it is true, but it's okay to have a rounded number. It makes complete sense. It allows us to have a better understanding of what the text is trying to say. Eighth assessment, instructional strategies. The teacher understands and uses a variety of instructional strategies to encourage learners to develop deep understanding of content areas and their connections, to build skills to apply knowledge in meaningful ways. So again, you can think of the inquiry from Abby's paper with the notes. So there was inquiry, there was lecture, which you see in the Bible and math lessons. There was active problem solving, such as the perimeter and area. There is the STEM kind of activity of designing the house. There was the note-taking, which really allowed the visual learners to take in what was on the board. And then audio, or the auditory learners, they were able to just simply hear my teaching, and we would have a lot of class discussion where they were able to really listen and dive into the context auditorily. With the ninth standard, professional learning and ethical practice. The teacher engages in ongoing professional learning and uses evidence to continually evaluate his or her practice, particularly the effects of his or her choices and actions on others, learners, families, other professionals in the community, and adapts practice to meet the needs of each learner. So one of the things that I changed was just continually changing the layout. So not only from groups of 4 to groups of 2, which you see the groups of 2 in the first standard evidence, but also who is paired with who. That was something that we would have to change when we kind of realized, sometimes the social groups changed. And some girls would get left out, some were getting brought back in, and we didn't arrange the classroom according to the social group, but we also didn't want the students to be kicking each other under their desks. So just to kind of really make sure that they had a positive learning environment, Mrs. Wilson and I would really work together on just kind of figuring out which student would go best with the other. For evaluations, Mrs. Wilson gave me a midterm evaluation on my student teaching, and one thing that I did with the 4th and 5th graders at the end of the 3rd quarter was allow them to give me a report card so that they assessed me. I didn't really take this into every decision that I made, however, I was interested to see just what their thoughts were, and I wanted to hear their input. So the first thing I asked them to grade me on was the teacher greets me happily each morning. Another one was the teacher makes sure that I understand the content with each lesson. Another one was my teacher is fair and kind. The last one, the second to last one was the teacher has fun and engaging activities or lessons, and then the last one was the teacher loves that she's my teacher, that sort of thing. With the greets me happily and loves that she's my teacher, I believe we're the highest with about a 3.8 out of 4. Now the rankings were 4 always, 3 almost always, and 2 sometimes, 1 not at all. So with even a 3 almost always, I was okay with that. So I varied between a 2.8, which was my teacher treats me with fairness and kindness, and I believe the huge weakness in that little kink was fairness, because that was just something that a lot of kids argued over was, that's not fair, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Now, every week, each Sunday, I would evaluate myself and reflect on my own teaching and submit it to my supervisor of that previous week. And so you see at the end of week 5, this week was a whirlwind. I honestly can't remember most of it. The biggest letdown was probably that the test grades went back to normal. When I first started teaching Bible, the first test, no one failed. Like, it was amazing. I was on a high. I was like, my strategies are working. This is great. And then eventually they would go back down. And I was like, okay, what's going on? I think a part of it was just kind of the loss of excitement of a new teacher. I think another part of it was I started sticking a bit more to the curriculum. I took a bit more freedom the first time to really kind of teach my own theology, but with that I also kind of just taught in what they were going to be tested on. And so when I changed my teaching, it was a bit more of the wholeness of the curriculum But with that, what they were going to be tested on was a bit more mixed in and a bit more, just a little note that was going to be on the board, which was legitimate for them to be tested on. I believe that with every test that I gave them, it was a legitimate test. They were completely responsible to know all of it. I still had 100s every single test. Some of those who were just poor testers kind of sank down into being poor testers. So one thing I did to help them out was have a word search or crossword review where they were kind of pre-tested to really try to figure out each question, what the answer was, and things like that. So with that, I felt much more legitimate that, for those who are poor testers, that's all I can do. I can't really do any more than that. So with that kind of evaluation, I definitely adapted and changed my teaching. The 10th standard, leadership and collaboration. The teacher seeks appropriate leadership roles and opportunities to take responsibility for students' learning, to collaborate with learners, families, colleagues, other school professionals, and community members to ensure learner growth and to advance the profession. So if you see in the Facebook post on the top left and bottom right, you see me commenting something under a friend who is also an elementary education student teacher. Those who are Moody students who are currently student teaching, we have our own Facebook group. And so we would just plug in our own little things, our own little resources and questions every now and then. And I would participate in that. Another thing I would kind of collaborate with was Teachers Pay Teachers. So I would go use other teachers' resources, which actually was super beneficial because the students would really take something that didn't look like the curriculum much more willingly than something that did come straight from the textbook. So with that, it really did help, and I would share a specific resource I found. I would put it on our curriculum track for the future teacher that would come along. I would put it with the Facebook groups and so on and so forth. Another thing with the collaborating, you actually see a little text snapshot between me and our principal, Ms. Hallman. It was just me in the first week simply asking Ms. Hallman if I could talk to her because I wanted to kind of know what my freedom could be as far as room layout and with curriculum and things like that before I really went to Mrs. Wilson, who's only been teaching for 5-6 weeks now and just coming up with, okay, I want to do this and this and this, what can we do? I really wanted to make sure that it was okay with the administration first. And so with those meetings, we would collaborate, we would come up with ideas, and she would give me the go-ahead or maybe not. For leadership, I took on leading worship for the elementary chapels every Friday morning. And another thing I started participating in was monitoring the lunch and recess time. So with all that evidence, I confidently believe that I was a distinguished teacher during the student teaching. And with that, as I was student teaching, I would adapt my philosophies of education and learning. One of the things that I kind of came across in my thoughts as I thought of my philosophy of education was that it wasn't so much of a philosophy as it is a theology. Because when we are educating our students, we're not just giving them the knowledge that our secular world might think, but we're really truly teaching them our wholesome theology, which math, which science, social studies, and English are really integrated in, because any knowledge that we have is from God. So I'm